Hi, I'm Paul Lerigo, and I'm here with Rob Rogers, Senior Food Safety Advisor, to ask him some questions about the COVID pandemic and changes that have occurred in the food supply chain. Welcome, Rob.
How you doing, Paul?
I'm good, thank you. So what's changed for you most in the last few months?
Wow. What
So I
hasn't
start with a big
changed?
question.
What hasn't changed? If we go back a year ago, we were kind of just getting into this pandemic. And of course, a lot of things changed for a lot of different people, for everybody, really. For me personally, I am a guy that travels around the world quite frequently, visiting customers and attending events and things like that. So obviously, that shut down quite a bit. I haven't really hopped on an international flight until the last time was when I came back from Australia right before the pandemic. So that's been a big change for me. But I've adapted well to these online sort of activities and really spent a lot of time doing that sort of work.
Okay. In which ways do you think the pandemic has affected the food supply chain?
Wow, again, in what ways hasn't it? They've been challenged with staffing, obviously, with ensuring that their workers' safety is first and top of mind. Struggles with the supply chain, challenges there. Um, from a regulatory perspective, certainly there's been a huge shift in how that activity has occurred. If you look over the course of the 2020 timeframe, the number of recalls, at least in the media presence, certainly that was taken up by other events, but you didn't see a whole lot of activity in that space. And obviously, with travel restrictions and concerns with the pandemic, there were struggles getting into facilities, traveling, obviously. So the regulatory space and auditing has had a huge shift in that space. Um, but I think the organizations have adapted well. When it first started off, certainly we saw uh, lack of toilet paper on the shelves of all things.
Yeah, I remember that.
But the food supply relatively stayed intact and was, wasn't very affected in a negative way. So I think the food industry has really done a fantastic job of, again, ensuring food their worker safety first and foremost, but then also dealing with all the challenges that they have to deal with, yet still maintaining a safe food supply for the consumers.
Sure. Of those topics that you've listed, what do you think the biggest issues are that the food processors and their suppliers are facing?
Yeah, I think we're coming towards I guess maybe seeing the light at the end of the tunnel for some of those things. The supply chains and transportation, those sort of things are really almost back up to full speed now. Um, so I think the ongoing challenges for them is really adapting to what's going to be the new normal. So obviously there's going to be concerns about the worker safety moving forward and ensuring that, maybe there are ways that we can space our workers out a little bit more to ensure those sort of precautions. But I think the biggest change for them is really from the regulatory side of it, where they're going to have to continually adapt to pressures from regulation to adapt technologies to be more digital than they are today. A lot of activity in the regulatory space, at least from the GFSI side of the business, has been they've really shifted to remote type audits, where a lot of that remote audit functionality, where maybe they would go on site for 2 days before the actual plant audit, just to review documentation and things like that. A lot of that is really transitioning over to that digital side. So I think the transformation for companies and a lot the culture shift for companies in that transition to a digital age, that's an area where they're challenged, I would say.
Sure. With that digitization in mind, which product inspection solutions can support manufacturers meeting these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, product inspection devices are obviously a key component within ensuring safe, quality foods out in the marketplace. And again, adapting the information that those systems supply, right? I mean, if you go back 20 years ago, a metal detector device in a food environment may have been in there because, oh, we had one guy, a retailer that wanted us to have it or something like that. So it was kind of, oh, here comes the retailer, let's push it into line and use it.
Sure.
Certainly that's changed with changes in regulation with the Food Safety Modernization Act, obviously a greater focus on those sort of things. So rather than just having this device in place that is, maintaining some level of quality and safety for the product, it's truly understanding the power that that data can tell you. um, a good example would be if my operators or maintenance staff is having to go out there and continuously adjust the system to deal with production variations. I might not be fully aware of that sitting in the back office, just looking at the statistics at the end of the day. But looking at a digital track of what's going on, I can see who's logged in, what time they've logged in, what sort of activity they've done. I can then really focus down on that and start to ask the real questions. Why? Why were you adjusting it at this? Is there something that we can correct in the process to make this, you know, more consistent? Um, Consistency is really the key as far as I'm concerned when you deal with items like a product inspection device, because the more consistent the item going through to be inspected, the more accurate the inspection can be. If there's a lot of deviations allowed within production, then those deviations have to be adjusted for within the inspection device. And now you're really desensitizing things, or accepting things that maybe we shouldn't accept. So as product inspection devices, I think the use of the data and connecting them not only to um, monitoring, the activity of the system, but also having that integrated with factory management systems and integrating it more into the business of the facility, you're going to be able to see loss of a reduction in false rejects, huge cost savings there, huge waste reduction there, huge efficiency improvements there. So just that one thing, reducing the false activity on the system, can have a major impact. So I think this data and the use of this data moving forward is going to become really impactful for customers understanding their own businesses, as well as from the outsider's perspective, from the auditor's perspective. We're starting to have discussions with those sort of organizations now, looking at how they may be able to look in and see that data that would provide them a higher level of confidence at a particular facility's location, so that they can kind of focus their attention on companies that may have a higher level of risk, or maybe that don't have a program that's as efficient or well developed as another facility. So I think that data and product inspection moving forward is going to become just as important as how sensitive the device is.
It sounds like the pandemic's kind of accelerated this digital change.
Yeah, I would certainly say, I mean, talk 2 years ago, these same discussions at a lot of the conferences, and there's concerns over the infrastructure and over data security, and kind of all these little roadblocks that people put up as to, well, these are why I'm hesitant to go down these roads. I think the pandemic has accelerated that because the infrastructure within the facilities has been adapted. I've heard of facilities doing a lot of work rather than screaming at each other on the production floor. Now everybody has headsets, and so they're able to space out and do those sort of things. There's a lot of more connectivity within the factory environments that maybe wasn't there before, even as something as simple as Wi-Fi availability on the production floor. A lot of facilities are moving, their infrastructure capabilities to have the capabilities for communication and data exchange because of the pandemic, and I think they'll be able to utilize those infrastructures moving forward in their, higher business needs.
Yeah. Just changing gear slightly, do you think the pandemic has made food fraud any more attractive?
Well, I mean, food fraud's always a concern, right? Not only from a brand perspective, but also from a safety perspective, uh, from a financial perspective. Um, so I think food fraud's always attractive to the shady characters of the world. I think the restrictions from things like audits and people not being allowed to be in facilities to do even internal type audits of their supply chain. Yeah, I mean, it certainly has opened up a higher opportunity for those sort of things, because we have stepped back a little bit and we are kind of distant in a lot of different areas within the food business, whether it's from our supply chain, whether it's from the regulatory pressures or concerns. Um, the other side of that always concerns me is not only fraud from a perspective of, hey, it's not 100% honey, it's something else, it's corn syrup, but more a perspective of, is there a higher risk now because of this distance from the regulatory space, for individual facilities to maybe skip some steps or to maybe bypass some of their safety concerns in order to maintain getting products onto the shelves. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? There's some value in this. Efficiency improvements in this distant remote auditing type thing, but there's also some current concerns because now we don't have our finger directly on the pulse of every facility because we're not able to visit them. So I think there's always going to be a potential for that. I think that regulators are taking that into concern with you know, vulnerability assessment, critical control point requirements, and so there is focus in that area as there should be. Um, and I think yeah, the pandemic has accelerated the potential for a lot of different things, both positive and negative. It's certainly something that we have to keep an eye on.
Finally, for me, what do you think will remain of the measures taken during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be a lot. I think we will see a lot more of this sort of interaction when it's deemed possible, right? Obviously, audits, you have to get on that shop floor and give the smell test. You can't really, we haven't invented sniff-o-vision yet, so you're gonna have to get out there. There's still gonna have to be the microbiological testing that's going on to assure sanitation is done properly and cross-contamination concerns are mitigated. But I think you're going to also see a lot of this sort of stuff stick, right? Where we are doing remote audits, desktop type audits and documentation audits remotely and digitally. I think that's something that will stick. I think you will see a rapid advancement in this digitalization of the food industry. Again, the writings on the wall from regulators. I mean, in the United States, the FDA has their desire to move forward with the future of food safety and the digitalization of the food safety network. not only from a safety perspective, but from a traceability perspective. You're starting to see some of the discussions that have occurred in the pharmaceutical space for traceability work their way into the food space now, and I really think that's something that's going to kind of stick with us, birthing from the digital age transition that the pandemic has caused. Um, I think you're also going to see a change in some of the business models just simply because the consumer's changed, right? So 2 years ago, I might have been on the front line of starting to get my groceries delivered to the house on a regular basis. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I went into a grocery store. It's been a few years since that I've had delivery services, and now that's a high level of business. So you're even starting to see a transition from some of the marketers and some of the manufacturers from direct to customer sales. So they're even bypassing the grocery chains at this point, to where you can go online and I can order a box of whatever directly from the manufacturer and have it delivered right to my door. You're seeing some of the leaders in that space, at least the retail home delivery space from like the Amazons of the world, start to move and transition even greater into the food space. So I think you're going to see a lot of changes due to the pandemic that stick around, not only from the consumer base that the manufacturers will have to adapt to, but also from the regulatory space. And again, from having the manufacturers find ways to utilize these advancements or these steps, such as the digitalization of data, and get the most out of it, right? There's a lot of data available. That's not the important part. It's what we do with the data. It's how we analyze the data, and really the actions we take, based on that data is where the value comes in, right? So yeah, I think a lot of things are going to stick around. We've already seen a lot of changes and a lot of things, you know, hopefully things like the restaurant businesses and the small mom and pop organizations are able to come back strong, and that of course creates another value chain for the food manufacturing industry to ensure that we're supplying those.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Rob. It's been really useful to have this session with you today, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Well, Paul, I appreciate you having me and speaking with me. Thank you for the time. Thanks.
No problem. If you have any other questions you'd like us to put to Rob about any of the topics we've covered here, you can reach us through the Food Safety Exchange LinkedIn channel. Thank you.